Cool. I think we should start with a brief introduction, since this is the first time a gathering like this has ever happened. But that being said, why don't we work our way around right here? We'll start in the kind of this side and we'll work our way through.
So,
Sheriff?
thank you, sir. My name is Corey Honey. I'm the sheriff of Butte County. Actually, a graduate of the GST level 1. I've been into 2 of them. I see my instructor. And last night I scratched my cornea. So if I'm winking at you, don't think I really love this.
Love it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rasha Burgess Shields. I'm a partner at the law firm of Jones Day, and I also serve as vice president of the Los Angeles Police Commission, which oversees the LAPD.
Love it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Scott. I'm an associate at Jones Day, and I have a pleasure of working with both Rasha.
Joe Cortez, currently working with Russia Los Angeles Police Department, looking at the way we train and educate our individuals, also Russia USC.
Love it. Jeff.
Hey everyone, Jeff Rabkin. I'm also one of Rasha's partners at Jones Day, and I have dabbled in the world of jiu-jitsu. I'm super excited to be here. I just got to tell you, I'm so excited to see everyone here. I can't wait to see what happens.
And to be clear, and credit is deserved where it's due here, is Jeff was the original one who made the call to Charlie that a gathering like this needed to happen and should happen, as both a fan of jiu-jitsu and also someone who works closely with Jones Day and Rasha and the crew there. So thank you for pulling that together. Will.
Hey everybody, William Briggs. I'm a probation officer with LA County. I'm one of the defensive tactics instructors, so I'm here on behalf of the probation department and just super excited. I trained here with them. I went through a GST, and obviously the same reason that everybody else is here. Just incredibly impressed with the curriculum and trying to infuse it into our curriculum to explore that partnership.
Thank you, Will. Sure.
I'm Luke Muir, a lieutenant with El Segundo PD, also a student here, went through GST. I was running our defensive tactics program. We're shifting a lot of the curriculum to kind of GST fundamentals, principles, and we're really excited. We also going to just start a partnership last May with Grace University, so we're paying for all of our sworn officers to come and attend classes.
Alex Levin, I'm a sergeant at the El Segundo Police Department. I've been training here for about 1.5 years, and then gone to GST, been a sergeant on our DT team.
Thank you. Thanks.
Magnus Lofstrom. I am Policy Director of Criminal Justice at the Public Policy Institute of California. We're an independent, nonpartisan think tank up in the Bay Area. And we are doing research around various criminal justice issues, trying to help the state and locals move forward in this realm.
Thank you.
I'm Deepak Kumar. I work under Magnus, and he took a large part of explaining PPIC, but a lot of my research is in the policing space. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invite. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Woolery. I'm the chief for the Division of Law Enforcement with the California Attorney General's Office.
Good afternoon, everyone. Damon Brown. I'm Special Assistant Attorney General at the California Department of Justice. I serve as the Attorney General's legal and policy advisor on police practices and civil rights, and I'm here as his representative today, and we're really happy to have been invited.
Thanks for making the trip.
Yes, I'm excited too. My name is Cherokee Melton. I'm a supervising deputy attorney general in the police practices section at the Attorney General's office.
Thanks for being here.
Alex Bill, I'm a lieutenant with LA School Police, officer in charge of our defensive tactics unit, and a longtime student here at Grace.
Yes, sir.
Well, Steve Zifferman, team captain for the Los Angeles School Police Department. Alex told me a little bit about GST. Obviously, we met and discussed that we now have 10 officers in the program as part of our pilot for school police. As a side note, we recently had some graduates from the LAPD Academy that came to our department, and it was a very noticeable difference in the confidence and competence of those graduates that came to self-defense, particularly because of the post-certified Gracie program the LAPD has. And so based on that, we are glad that we're part of the de-escalation process and reform. We're going to start utilizing this academy for that.
Thank you, sir. Sean.
Sean Morse. I'm a captain and the commander of the Office of Employee Safety and Assistance for the Highway Patrol.
Excellent.
Hi, Ron, I'm Trevor Wilder, Sergeant for the California Highway Patrol's Office of Employee Safety and Assistance and Advanced Officer Safety Instructor as well.
Excellent.
Joe Moody, CHP, I'm the Lieutenant, Office of Employee Safety Assistance, and this guy recently encouraged me to start my jiu-jitsu training, so I'm a white belt, started this last month.
All right. How's that going?
I love it.
All right.
I'm Joseph, I'm the officer in charge of the arrest control unit for LAPD. You said, the Gracie fingerprint has been in our curriculum 4 years. And to be in this moment right here has been, I told Henry, a 28-year journey since I got to arrest control. So I am excited to be here. I cannot wait to.
Thanks, DJ. Appreciate it.
So great signing back there.
Yes, and Craig Hanami will be part of the discussion, an integral part of the discussion today. And Craig, why don't you introduce yourself and your agency?
Craig Hanami from WPD Washington, working with law enforcement and one of our defensive tactics instructors in our department last year, partnered with Heather and it's receiving a lot of years.
Excellent. And Charlie?
Charlie Fernandez, 29-year retiree, Arlington, Texas PD, integrated GST, was aware of all the hurdles back then, and am now happily the director of GST. So I transitioned to retirement.
So we have Mitch from the NSA. I'd like Mitch, why don't we unmute yourself, Mitch, and introduce yourself, and then we'll have Ryan introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mitch Cunningham. I'm Chief Law Enforcement Advisor for the National Sheriff's Association. And as you know, we are partnering with Gracie on a couple different things, a white paper and also a research project. And we are encouraging our members to use leverage-based tactics. So really excited to be here.
Awesome. Candace, you want to jump in there as well?
Sure. Thanks for having us. Candace Hill, I'm the Assistant Director of Grants and Contracts at the National Sheriff's Association, working with Mitch on the projects that he spoke of.
Excellent. Thank you. And then I'll have Ryan Stevens from Florida. Come on in, Ryan.
Good afternoon, everybody. Corporal Ryan Stevens, Pasco Sheriff's Office over here in Florida. We're in an agency. We're just on the verge of going full-time with this weekly training with GST. So we're super excited to be a part of this today.
Excellent. Thank you for tuning in. Anyone else here? Dr. Scuderi, come on in.
Guy Scuderi, I'm down in Florida, a GST instructor for about 6 years now, and just proud to be part of the team.
We're going to get started here with a special guest, Dr. Arnsten, in a second. But I just want to acknowledge the fact that, you know, a meeting like this has never happened, as far as I know, with this many people from this many different populations about the subject of use of force, policing, and better training, really. And I'm not oblivious to the possibility that many of us share diametrically opposing views on many of the same subjects. But I think that we all share in common the belief that law enforcement needs to do better, that the relationship between law enforcement and civilians is severely tarnished, is damaged, and they can do better. We believe it's possible that they do better. The question for us today is, what does better look like, and how do we make that better possible for the 18,000, give or take, agencies around the country? And that we all share in common. The special guest we have today, Dr. Amy Arnsten, one of the world's leading neuroscientists from Yale University, where she is a professor. We asked her to come on and just kind of kick us off with a few-minute introduction to some of the concepts of neuroscience as they pertain to the perception of control and use of force. So Dr. Arnsten, the floor is yours, and thank you so much for joining us all the way from Yale. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative that you're interested in our research and using it for such a noble and important cause. So I do research on the prefrontal cortex and how stress affects the brain. And it turns out this has, I think, immediate relevance to a lot of what you guys are dealing with in the field on an everyday basis. And so the prefrontal cortex is one of our most recently evolved brain regions under our foreheads there. It's essential for abstract reasoning, working memory, and the executive functions. And so thoughtful top-down control. What should I do so that things will be better in the long run? And a lot of this involves inhibiting inappropriate actions, thoughts, and emotions like aggressive impulses, distractions, being able to persevere through difficulty and challenging situations, And it's able to do this because it has extensive top-down connections to other brain areas where it can really regulate them. It's key for high-order decision-making, for planning and organization, and for something called metacognition, thinking about thinking. So insight and judgment about ourselves and others. What is this person thinking and feeling right now? Having empathy for them, having moral behavior. And these functions can be very strong when we're feeling safe, alert, in control. But when we're exposed to uncontrollable stress, and the key thing here is it's an experience where we feel out of control. It can be highly challenging, but if we feel in control of it, the brain stays in a healthy state. But if we feel out of control, we have these mechanisms that within moments take the prefrontal cortex offline. And at the same time, these same chemical reactions are strengthening part of our brain that's much more primitive, the amygdala, which does unconscious emotional responses, actually activates the stress response when it senses threat. And the amygdala also turns on a part of the brain called the striatum, which mediates our unconscious habits and instincts. So we switch then from this reflective, thoughtful, to this more primitive state. We also activate many of our sensory cortices, so sensory perception can be more vivid. And the habit part, I think, is particularly relevant to what you guys are trying to do, because if you know you're going to be in a threatening situation, to actually learn helpful habits to do under duress. So you don't have to think about it. Your brain already knows what to do that's constructive. And of course, this is the whole idea behind boot camp, behind many emergency training things, so that we don't have to think in the moment. We have good habits at our fingertips. So these reflexive circuits can save our life under some conditions of danger. And the one I often think of is if you're cut off on the highway, you don't want to be a slow, thoughtful philosopher. You want to have your striatum slam on the brakes. But obviously can be harmful when thoughtful solutions are needed to thrive, and especially for things like de-escalation. And really important, and I think key to some of what you guys are doing, a feeling of sense of control can help restore prefrontal top-down control. The prefrontal, when it thinks it's in control, can go down to lower brain centers and actually shut off the stress response. So this is why teaching things to help people feel a sense of control can be so important.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's give her a hand, you guys. We appreciate it, Dr. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Before we go much deeper into all of what we want to discuss and share, we do need to get on the same page physically. And I know some of us in here practice jiu-jitsu, some are students here, many have done the GST course, but I know some have no exposure at all. So I'd like a volunteer, Deepak or Magnus. Deepak, let's go. He's like, get in there, dude. All right, let's get on the same page, you guys. Let's talk about some concepts and just kind of put what we're hearing from the doctor to practice a little bit, and we'll keep it low stress. So Deepak, come on the mat here, join me.
My wife's gonna be so pissed at you.
So I'm gonna have you lay down on your back with your feet this way and your head towards our friend that way. Yep, feet this way, spin around 180, you got it. So if I start standing up, push comes to shove, eventually we may end up on the ground, especially against a larger subject, and we're gonna get on top of you. This is called the mount. And the reason why this is so bad is because, make a fist, you can't really reach the subject where they can reach you. So naturally, you don't want to be here for that reason alone. But let's say you're the officer and you end up underneath the subject and they're holding you down. Maybe their friends are on their way. Maybe they simply want to hurt you and they want to take your gun. What in your mind, what's going through your mind in terms of how you might push this person off? Naturally, Officer Deepak, what would you do to push me off? What's natural? What are you thinking of? Just give me a shot. Go ahead.
Maybe just
Go, for real. Go, Deepak. You guys have to believe in it. Come on, come on, go. My friends are coming. Hurry up, guys. I got him. There you go. Let's go. Officer Deepak. This is the one who got us last week. We got him, you guys. Go, get him, go. Get out. His friends are coming. Go, Deepak. Go, 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 go. What are the odds? Very low that you escape at this point. And I'm not punching. You're not punching, but it could be much worse than this. And all the while, what's happening? You're burning energy, right? And in a situation like this, where an officer does not have the skills to get out, one could articulate this for Deepak as a deadly force situation. His life is in danger. We've seen the videos of the officer getting punched, head is bouncing off the pavement, and they resort to deadly force as a result, justifiably, because they're about to die because of their lack of training. So if we switch roles here, I'll lay down, Deepak will mount, both knees on the ground. Yep, you're good right here. Both knees down. Don't let me go. Hold on as tight as you can, but don't let me sit up. For real, squeeze for real. Deepak, do not let me go. No matter what, don't let me out. Let me out. One more time. I cheated. Jiu-jitsu. Come back. So Deepak, here's the difference. When you're on the bottom, right, and you're a strong guy, so you like try to bench press me off. So you like try to push me. And every time you push me, put your hand out, please. That's all I did. Other side. That's all I did. So I didn't fall because I had my base to stabilize me. Instead, when you held me down, I didn't push you at all. I knew you would need your hands to stabilize. So all I did was go. And also, you didn't feel me, but I did this. Feel that? I trapped his foot on the same side as the trapped arm. His leg is also immobilized. So now both appendages on this side cannot stabilize. So take this hand, Deepak, put it on the ground right there. Can't. And now as I bridge, don't fall. Do not fall. Resist. Deepak, resist. It's impossible. Even if I do it slowly, it doesn't matter because the technique prevails in this case. So if you're down, and I'm mounted, elbows by your side, excellent. This hand's going to grab my wrist right here. This hand will grab my wrist. Switch hands, please. Yes, great. And right now, what you're using is called a C grip on my wrist. Hold tighter for wrist squeeze. It's going to slip right out. So instead, we're going to use a monkey grip where our thumb is actually involved in the hook. Now I can't post out. See the difference? And now I cannot stabilize as you have the hook elbow to your chest. And this is great for lateral control, but I can pull my hand out the back door. To prevent that, your other hand will grab my tricep. Yes, and lock it down. Now I can't pull out the back or the side. This is cemented to your body. And you're using much larger muscle groups than my lateral deltoids, which is why I can't post out laterally no matter how strong I am. Now, if you simply put your ankle over my ankle right here, step over. Yes. And your other foot right in the center, bring it up. Beautiful. Don't let my hand go to the ground no matter what. Now, pushing off this foot, you're going to look that way and bridge your hips up. Push your hips up high as you can and go right to your knees. Officer Deepak, look at that. You can get up and get to safety or utilize other force options, hopefully less than deadly force, unless it's absolutely necessary. Or you can step over, mount on me one at a time. Step your leg over. 1, 2, and now you're in the dominant position. Sit up. Look how you make a fist. Look how interesting. Sit up taller. I'm 6'4". I can't reach you, but you can reach me. Not that strikes are the answer, but just to show the change in the advantage of the position. If you can just get to the mount, get some breathing room, re-engage your prefrontal cortex, right? Take control of the situation, and then be able to make rational, executive functioning decisions because you are in control of the situation. Deepak will stay right here. Let's talk about one more situation, and then we'll continue. You're mounted on the subject. You got the suspect down. He just robbed a bank and tried to kidnap a child, and you took him down. You got him here. Backup is on its way. All you have to do is keep him here for 30 seconds. If 30 seconds, I'm on my back still, backup is here, we can take him, we can arrest him, we can transition to handcuffing, we're good to go, Chief goes into custody. Hold however you want, and I don't know jiu-jitsu to be clear, I'm not going to trap and roll you. That move I just did, I won't use that, no jiu-jitsu allowed, I'm just street, okay? Pin however you want, on your mark, set, go. Interesting, right? So I didn't even jujitsu you right there. It's just the fact that I'm a little bit bigger and stronger, and I just pressed you off. You fell off. I'm gone with the kid and the money. Backup shows up, and there's no suspect to be found. So you didn't have control over me because you didn't know how to control me. So lay down, please. Eve, take your shoes off, please. Balance on Deepak. Deepak, bend your knees. Bend your knees, get ready. Eve, hug his neck, put the hooks in. Yeah. Deepak, put your hands on her hips and bench press her hips straight up. Push your hips as hard as you can. There's no bench press. Hip pressure, connection, control. What are the likelihood that he bench presses her right now? Non-existent. And it's not Officer Henner. It's just someone who knows a little bit of something. She knows more than a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? Hooks and hip pressure. So all that happened here is when Eve mounted, instead of, because if I, even my side, lay down please, even my size, if I lay on you, if you put your hands on my hips and you bump your hips and push me off to the side hard, go, big push, go, 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 go. Even I'm dislodgeable at 200 pounds, it's not a big deal. But look, if I instead do what Eve did, which is hug and hooks, put your hands on my hips, push as hard as you want. You're not gonna budge me even an inch. And no hand, put your hand back here, choose the side, pick a side, throw me off, go. Nope, nope, go ahead, choose the side. I want to see Deepak do it. Deepak, how is it feel on your breath right now? How does it feel on your body? Not comfortable, right? So at this point, how much longer are you gonna fight before you say, okay, I'm good? Based on what you're feeling right now, give me an answer. 10 seconds, 20, maybe 30 seconds?
Yeah, I mean.
At most, right? At most. And then what do you say to yourself? I can't get him off. I'm done. And then what do? Do I sit up and punch him in the face? No, I talk to him. I verbally and dynamically de-escalate, as we're going to discuss today. So switching roles, you mount on me, same Deepak, same suspect, same bank robber, same kidnapper, mount. All you're going to do is lay flat on my chest. Yeah, hug my neck with this arm, put your hand out wide, and now we're going to take both your legs and hook my legs. And here's the key, champ. See how your toes are facing out? Put your toes facing each other instead. And now I want your knees to come off the ground because you're going to push your hips down. Yeah, feel my voice change? Excellent. Feel this knee flow. I'm going to try to bench press you for real right now. Keep the hips heavy. That's all I got. I surrender, officer. I don't know what else to say. Give him a hand. Very nice. You can sit back down over here. Don't go looking for trouble now. You're very good. You're good to go. I want to show you guys something here that kind of will continue from that point. I'm going to share my screen, youngin. That will continue from that point, which is a concept that ties very tightly into this called dynamic de-escalation. Verbal de-escalation. Sir, come with me outside. I understand you're upset. We need to talk outside. Trying to de-escalate, managing distance, managing your emotional response to the situation, trying to cool things down. It works sometimes. It doesn't work other times. When it doesn't work, a physical altercation ensues. You end up in a scuffle. You're on the ground. And normally, if verbal de-escalation fails, and all hell breaks loose, at that point, all bets are off. We're going all out until the suspect complies or is forced to comply because they can't move anymore and they have 6 officers dogpiling the suspect. It doesn't have to be that way when you know jiu-jitsu. What happens is instead, when standard de-escalation fails, we establish physical control. This is one example. Once we establish physical control, for example, heat on right here, please. Once we establish it, it could be a submission. It could be anything. Let's say I'm here and I have him on my gun side where we want it to be Americana, and I lock him up and I catch a submission here. I put pressure. He does something. He responds in some way. He acknowledges effectiveness of my control. Could be verbal, could be physical, could be a yelp, could be tapping out. People know what that is these days. In any way that he acknowledges, what do? Instead of continuing to squeeze, I alleviate pressure first. Number one, look at this. Look at the graph. I alleviate pressure. Number two, I give commands, I communicate my commands and the benefits of compliance. Stop fighting and I'll alleviate the pressure. I'll keep the pressure off your arm. Okay. Are we good? Good. Excellent. If he in fact complies, then it can transition into a cuffing procedure. Hand over your head. Roll with me, roll with me, roll with me. Stay where you are. Don't move. Other hand behind your back, please. All the way back. Yep. Cuff 1, cuff 2. If he complies, we're done. We finish it. Subject complies. If he doesn't comply, when I issue commands and benefits of compliance, guess what we do? We restart the cycle with progressively higher levels of control. All of this is only possible for an officer who understands how to control a subject physically. This privilege of dynamic de-escalation is not afforded to officers who are poorly trained. You're in the mix, you're panicking, you're going to do whatever you can to stay afloat, which leads us to the next slide. The compliance window. This right here is what we want for every officer to understand what this is and how to stay within it. Initially, when a subject chooses active resistance, what is that? I'm not going to jail. We're going to fight. And they fight. There comes a point, which Deepak felt and applied to me, where we reach control, where they go, okay, you got me, full control. When that happens, we enter what is known as the compliance window, where they feel like fighting is not going to get the results that they want. And then what happens? You stay in that window until, and only if, you cross the PFC line or you have this amygdala hijack. And what is this? It's when someone says, okay, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And the officer goes triple down harder on them. That gives the subject a perceived loss of control because their arm is now mangled and now their primal self-preservation mode kicks in. And the person that you're dealing with in terms of their resistance level, once you trigger that amygdala hijack, you guys, We've all seen it. That person goes into wild mode, and now you have to deal with the person, the subject that you essentially triggered that transition from the control window, the compliance window, into their self-preservation mode. The interesting is, in many cases, this one is started by the suspect. They choose resistance. This one is often started by the untrained officer, because they don't know that you should not exceed that compliance window and the amount of pain or discomfort. This idea of when they acknowledge effectiveness, ow, 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 you might think it's working, let's go harder. It has the opposite effect. And you know what else also has the opposite effect? When the subject is here, prone down on your belly, hiding their hand, and we're over here. Boom, stop resisting. And you're hitting them in the back of the head, yelling, stop resisting. They can't even hear you because they are suffering the amygdala hijack, as referenced by Dr. Arnstein. They aren't even in their conscious, rational. They can't say, okay, if I stop resisting, maybe we'll stop it. They can't do that when they're getting struck in the back of the head so violently and the amygdala hijack takes over. So once again, what is this all based on? The officer's perception of control. And that perception of control is almost entirely rooted in the actual ability to control. And with that, I would like you to see a video that kind of contextualizes some of this. So we're going to go here, and we're going to see, without jiu-jitsu, some of the visuals. Some of these you've seen, they've gone viral, of what we prefer if we have a choice. Now, there's a time for a strike. But in many cases, the striking, the excessive striking, is a result of the officer not having control options at a lower level of force. In many cases, they're panicking. As a result, they're rapidly escalating their level of force. And a lot of times they take it personal. It's an emotional response because they're angry at the suspect. So now they're going to use whatever tools they have, right? Be it an impact weapon, taser sometimes, or their fists. And this is what we want to see less of in viral videos. And this is what we want to see more of. Controlled jiu-jitsu. No punches. No emotion. No rush. Control. De-escalate. Communication. Spoke to this guy after this incident. I didn't punch him one time, Henry. We train jiu-jitsu on a weekly basis. We're good to go. This was an officer who, weeks after his GST training, took the suspect's back, got his hands off the suspect's neck on purpose, knowing not to touch the neck, and controlled here until backup arrived. Las Vegas officer here, using side control, no punches, totally putting out the fire. And like Deepak felt, it doesn't take much for you to feel like, okay, I'm good, you got me. That's what we want. When they say, you got me, armbar by one of our, Jared Tipton, one of our officers outside of a shoplifting suspect here outside of a store. Perfect. He held his armbar and he talked to the radio, waiting for the patrol unit to eventually show up. He literally stayed like this for several minutes, holding the armbar. No pressure, didn't break the guy's arm. Just hold the armbar extended, right, locked up. Big guy, as you can see, and just on his radio with the other hand like this. And then you'll see eventually, not right now, but in the full video, he pulls right up. So you guys, this is why we're here. Marietta Police Department in Georgia. Many of you know the data. I'll summarize it here for those who don't. 145 officers, small agency, relatively small agency in Georgia. They had an inciting incident. The guy was mad, some guy at IHOP was mad about his bacon. Officers get called, they show up, and they typical, the dog pile right inside the store, right inside the IHOP, and they're just letting them have it. The command staff, whom I know well, because they were 12 years GST certified by the time this incident happened. The agency, the instructors were 12 years certified. They said, man, Henry, when we first saw the video, we were very upset because it was an inciting incident, uproar in the community, a small town. This guy gets beat up at a restaurant. Why, all the whys. And he shared with me, he said, Henry, when we saw the video, our impulse was, why did you do that, officers that were involved? What's wrong with you guys? And then before they even approached the officers with that attitude, they came back to the table and they said, wait a minute, we're giving them 0 to 2 hours per year of DTAC training. What we see on this video isn't their doing, it's our doing. And they said, we have to completely, in every GST course, to be clear, we do week-long certification courses. Every single week-long GST course that we certify 50, 70, 100 instructors in the room at a time, then they go back and they're certified by us. Then they go teach at their agencies. Every time we tell them, ladies and gentlemen, do whatever you can to get more training at your agency. Weekly training is what we want to see. At least 1 hour per week per officer. We're advocating in every course. This agency, 12 years later, after being in the room with us, finally said, we're going to do what we've been talking about doing for so long, but never did. We're going to make weekly jiu-jitsu available for these officers. our officers, on an ongoing basis. Anybody who wants to opt in can do it. It's not mandatory, but it's going to be provided at a neighborhood jiu-jitsu school owned by a civilian. They can go there. We're going to pay their tuition. 95 of 145 officers opted in to the training. 95 officers opted in, 2,600 training hours total. 1 reported training injury at that school, which, by the way, we have no affiliation with this school. It's just a local Brazilian jiu-jitsu civilian school. 23% reduction in taser deployments based on their comparison. 48% officer injury reduction agency-wide. 18 months over 18 months. 18 months prior, 18 months after. 48% reduction in officer injury. Now, I asked Major King, who's responsible, I said, hold on. 48% reduction in officer injury is great, which led to 66,700 reduction in workers' comp claims. And I said, Major King, but what about the population of officers who do jiu-jitsu? The 95 who opted in, and then you have the remaining 50, I guess. What about that population? How many injury claims from within that population in the 18 months? He said 0 workers' comp claims from the trained population. This is talking about field injuries, use of force injuries by the officers. None. So that was amazing data. Civilian injury reduction, serious injuries and hospitalizations down 53%. More than twice as likely to be hospitalized by an officer who did not opt in for jiu-jitsu than the ones who do. None of this is surprising to us. It may be surprising to someone who doesn't do jiu-jitsu and someone who isn't in law enforcement, but to anybody who practices what we're talking about here, it's 100% expected this. We just never had this, but it's great that we now do. That's the Marietta case. For the GST course, University of West Florida conducted a survey study of GST course participants. And it was a survey regarding self-efficacy before and after they completed the course. Pre-course efficacy, 74.7%. Post-course, 89.7%. And that's comparable to all of them. I can effectively control a subject who is bigger than I. Pre-course, 72%. Post-course, 89%. Deadly force. I feel confident that I'm not likely to need to use deadly force when an unarmed subject is pinning me to the ground. Pre-course was 72% confidence that they would survive that encounter. Post-course is 89% confidence. Fellow officer abilities. Do you feel the average officer at your agency can escape from being held on the ground during a violent encounter? Yes was 21%, no was 78.2%. Findings suggest that attendees of GST Grace Level Tactics Level 1 increase officer self-efficacy, confidence, and stress management. Officers appear to hold varying beliefs of their fellow officers' preparedness and training to effectively handle violent encounters. Lastly, all participants agreed that the GST curriculum was practical, job-related, and should be mandatory for all law enforcement officers. Every survey respondent agreed with that.
And this is a 1 week course.
1 week course that they're doing. This is not training for the week, every week for the whole year. We also survey our own participants, 9,481 over the last 3 years of our course graduates. And from 1 to 5, strongly disagree, strongly agree. The jiu-jitsu techniques in GST were effectively adapted for use in law enforcement, 4.89, where the line indicates up there for all of them pretty much. GST proficiency will likely reduce an officer's risk of injury during a use of force encounter, 4.91. GST proficiency will likely reduce the risk of injury to a suspect during use of force encounter, 4.87. Likelihood that you will recommend the GST course to other officers, 4.95. So all fine and dandy. Bellevue Police Department in Washington, 1 year ago, the chief agreed, we're going to offer weekly jiu-jitsu to our officers on duty. Craig, whom I've known for how many years now? 16 years. He's been a GST instructor, but in all that time, he gets certified, then he goes home and he teaches for 4 hours a year or 2 hours a year. The joke that we all know is prevalent in law enforcement. So he's been doing that for 16 years since he first got certified. Last year, finally, the chief who was Santa Monica chief came to Bellevue, Washington, and said, hey, Craig, what do you think? Hey, we should go once a week. We should do this training. They did it last year. They implemented it. It's been an entire year. We just renewed the contract. And I had the privilege of traveling there last year. And when I did, I met Officer Brian O'Connor. Brian Connor, who had an incident take place 2 classes on the weekly curriculum. He was training 2 classes, lesson 1, lesson 2. And 24 hours after his second class, he had an encounter with a auto theft suspect. I met him and he articulates it on his own. This is him and his partner addressing the suspect in a grocery store at the self-checkout line. And then he's going to articulate in the video, I hope the mic works here, his own experience, and I'm going to be with him on the camera here to talk about it, just so you can get a sense here. They take him down, rear takedown. He's trying to sit up. They pin him back on his back. Officer Connor is on the left. He catches this Americana that I just demonstrated, and then he'll articulate it here. And turns and faces, and you lock him up right here. Yep. And now talk us through what happened next right here.
All right, so got the Americana in. He's still trying to escape. I was able to put tension. And I told him, lay flat, stop resisting, and he actually complied. What was great about it is there were people in the crowd who were talking to us, and I was able to turn and watch them and talk to them and explain to them that I wasn't choking this gentleman, that he was fine, and he didn't need any assistance from them.
How late after the class that you learned this move did this incident happen?
The next day.
This was the day after you learned it.
It was awesome because I wasn't exerting myself at all, and I could comfortably wait there for backup. And I've been in other situations where every second was like an eternity waiting for backup to come. He was significantly bigger than me. I believe he was about 5'11" and outweighed me by almost 20 pounds. He was a very strong guy. I could have had to use a taser. I could have used a baton. I for sure could have done strikes and it would have been justified. But this made it so that he was fine. He didn't need to go to the hospital. He could be put in jail more quickly, and nothing to document as far as injuries on his side.
Oh my gosh. Now, are you holding me here as long as you held him here?
Yeah, at least.
Okay, you can get off me. Other backup right. All right. So I just had to share that, and that was just an incredible win for the agency, for the officer, for Craig and all the training and all the hard work they're putting in there, and for us to say, wow, this is two classes. This is not a lifelong, like many of the people in here, jiu-jitsu practitioners who train on the civilian sector on their own time with their own money. No, literally, when you got to weekly training and he had 2 classes, his 3rd class was real life. The win for the suspect. The win for the suspect as well. Everyone was protected in the encounter. He retained control of his healthy function of his prefrontal cortex. No amygdala hijack for him. And because he didn't rip on the guy's arm, there was no amygdala hijack for the suspect. So he was able to interact with someone who themselves was in their healthy functioning prefrontal cortex, which makes rational negotiation possible. If he would have started punching the guy would have responded in survival instinct, right? Self-preservation mode, and that amygdala hijack would have taken over, and he would have created a much bigger challenge for himself than he needed to. So everything about this couldn't have been better. And we're so proud that happened.
And just off camera, you cannot see it, but was the woman who was with him, who was that's the person that he was corresponding with, and she was videoing it. So she was the one who was like, "Hey, you get it."
The woman with the suspect was filming it.
Yeah, and then she ended up being a petitioner in a order violation. So he was violating an order of protection, which they didn't know at that time. But I feel like the video was so uneventful that she didn't even post it.
It was so uneventful, and that's my point. We need to find it. So here's the point, you guys. We need less viral videos, shocking arrests gone bad, and we need more unremarkable arrests. Boring, putting out the fire, nothing to see here, keep walking, he's safe, I'm safe, nothing's happening. That's what we want more of. Now, shifting gears slightly before we kind of dig into it, I want to talk about, and we put a lot of thought into this because it's an important part to address, jiu-jitsu training and implicit bias in law enforcement. And I wrote it down. I'm going to read it because I want to say it exactly as I thought it. We would be remiss to have a discussion about use of force without also addressing the implicit biases prevalent in law enforcement and the effect that these biases have on use of force. There is a direct correlation between perception of danger and the level of force used in an interaction. The higher the perceived danger in a given situation, the higher the level of force we expect an officer to use. When we analyze what factors will influence an officer's perception of danger, there are many obvious and acceptable factors: behavior of the suspect, number of officers present, location of the interaction, etc. But there is also a possibility that an officer perceives a person as more dangerous entirely due to implicit bias. And one of the reasons why this is so concerning is because this inflated perception of danger may cause an officer to escalate their level of force unjustly during an encounter. And this is where improved training can play a significant role in reducing the potential negative consequences of this particular bias as it relates to use of force. While in no way are we insinuating that improving defensive tactics will eliminate bias in law enforcement, we can say for certain that the more training an officer receives, the lower their perception of danger will be in a use of force encounter. And only once the perception of danger decreases, so can the level of force that we would expect from that officer. So while there is little doubt that implicit bias is prevalent in law enforcement, some are beginning to doubt the efficacy of the classroom training on this subject, particularly over longer periods of time and during high-stress encounters. When you understand how the theory of implicit bias is rooted in a dual system process of cognitive psychology, wherein the system 1 reaction to a stimulus is a flash reaction based on pre-known ideas or experiences, a sort of shortcut in forming a thought, and a system 2 reaction is the conscious response to the initial bias experienced in system 1, it's easy to see how an officer's ability to retain healthy PFC function is of the utmost importance. To this effect, it's our belief that giving an officer weekly jiu-jitsu training based on law enforcement control tactics will improve their ability to meaningfully apply what they are learning in the classroom and will reduce the likelihood that they unjustly escalate their level of force during a stress encounter. So people will often say, training is great, but we have cops that have these biases. So, are you giving more dangerous weapons to potentially dangerous cops? The reality is they already have the most dangerous weapons at their disposal. And it's our belief that by giving them countless through the training and all the controls and all the holds and all the inherently de-escalatory techniques, by giving them countless intermediate options of empty hand control techniques, it's not going to make that worse. We're just going to slow down the escalation and in some cases reverse the escalation if they're able to have a healthy system 2 response to their perception of their own bias during the interaction. And that's what it boils down to. There's a bias that might be implicit, but if you can perceive that because you have PFC function, only then can you then throttle your what might otherwise be your impulsive response with the training you've received. But you have to have the training to retain that PFC function, because once you have that perceived loss of control, everything goes out the window. It's almost like when we see excessive force right now in a viral video, when you guys watch those videos and it makes us all angry that that's happening, and especially in cases where you know the facts and you know it really didn't have to be like that. There was obviously short clips there. When you see those, on some hand, you get half the country, you get people saying, hey, that's a racist cop, they're doing that. On the other hand, I look at that and I say, that's possible. But it's very interesting because it's hard to distinguish in that moment. Is that person behaving that way because they don't have the training options and they themselves are panicking, therefore a rapid escalation of force is necessary for their own survival? Or are they behaving a certain way due to their biases? We don't know. And it's my belief that once every officer is trained sufficiently, only then can we start to look at situations like that and actually be able to ascertain what is the cause of that aggressive behavior. Because if you see me behaving like that, it's because I'm angry at that person and I want to hurt them. It's not because I needed to, because I have the training to control them in much lower levels of violence and with much lower levels of violence. I want to talk about the gap between public perception of law enforcement efficacy and the reality based on current training standards in California and across the country. How big is that gap? The civilian out there, the average person, believes that when someone is suited up like this, looking that sharp, shiny boots, badge, everything's to the tens, right? They look as professional and as official as it can be. What's the reality, though, for the average officer who's dressed up that nicely? Their training doesn't match their appearance. Make sense? Is that fair to say? Like Navy SEALs, if you look one way and their training matches how they look. Law enforcement look one way, all buttoned up, all dialed in, the best patrol, the best weapons, the best car, the best dog, the best everything. But when you look behind the curtain at their training, it's actually disastrously insufficient, which is why we're getting so many viral videos anti-law enforcement. So this is my point. The perception of law enforcement capabilities is here. They expect a magnificence, 10 out of 10, Navy SEAL level jiu-jitsu skills. But the reality is, it's here. If that. And this is why I call that gap the PD gap. Public disappointment gap. You're right? Because if you see a video and you're thinking that cops should be able to handle that situation with lower levels of violence, but they don't, what do you think to yourself? That's a bad person. I got to condemn the officer and I got to condemn all of law enforcement because he didn't need to do all that. But again, if the officer was never given the tools, we got to be careful how we place blame until they have ample tools to deal with that with lower levels of force. It's hard to pinpoint the blame. And this is why for the last 30 years, 1991 started our relationship with LAPD. We took over about 10 years later, and this is why it's been such a frustrating journey. We train trainers all year long. Thousands of trainers get trained, 40 hours a week, beautiful, amazing course. Then we send them off, and they're now victims of their agency's training requirement budget / time, which is 4 hours a year, 4 hours every 2 years in California. And now they're handcuffed because they want to offer all the skills we gave them, but they go back and the chief says, sorry, the state only mandates 4 hours every 2 years. So find a way to sneak that in there and we'll go with that. And then we wonder why the videos go viral and why the whole thing is falling apart. And the sad part is when a video goes viral for a police officer performing poorly in middle of nowhere, United States, who knows? The general public doesn't look at that and blame that agency. They look at that and they say, hey, all cops are bad. And this is, I try to warn the public on this one. You guys, we cannot generalize law enforcement because one state and one agency and they're all different entities. So when one cop performs poorly, Bellevue's doing a great job. So I try, but I'm not loud enough and I cannot convince them not to group all law enforcement in their negative judgment. So that's my solution, not going to work. I'm trying to say, hey, blame that agency. The rest of the guys are doing good. We're good. We just have to make all law enforcement better. That's the way. The hard part is the chief typically wants to stick to this minimum state training requirement. And then the training instructors at that level, they get so frustrated because they're trapped in the middle. So some of our instructors in-house, start with CJ and see if anybody else wants to add on. What does that feel like? You're the trainer. You have all the skills. You get 4 hours every 2 years. And realistically, how does that 4 hours actually look?
It feels useless because I've got 282 adjunct instructors that was trained through an 80-hour course. 40, they're still waiting to be their resumes to be updated. And they can't do anything. That 4-hour course consists of being truthful. I use some reflection for 2 hours. And then 2 hours of just handcuffing. We're able to do it. And then the public thinks we have the utmost ground training, because we're the LAPD. And it's just not true.
Anybody else talk about that frustrating gap right there? Any other trainers locally? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
And it's not based on that, but I would, an observation. If it seems to me that maybe there's not enough advocacy to go back to California Post and say, guess what? We have the tools to eliminate and prevent a lot of this stuff. And maybe California Post needs to reevaluate how many hours need to happen mandated per year for these programs.
Can anyone tell me how they ended up at 4 hours? Anybody in the room can tell me how they ended up at 4 hours every 2 years? No. And I've never got a straight answer on that. It could not be more arbitrary. And here we are, the entire nation is suffering, and for sure California, but the rest, and some agency, as Charlie reminds me, have zero. Texas has a 0 hour annual in-service training requirement for hands-on arrest and control defensive tactics. You never have to do hands-on as a police officer after the initial academy in Texas ever again, and you can remain a police officer in Texas. Sir.
Thank you. So to that point, I've actually been talking with Manny Alvarez about this topic. Manny was the director of Post, the top guy there, and broached this topic with them. Post, like a lot of government agencies, is easily mired within the bureaucracy that exists, and it's easy for them to default to, we do this because this is the way it's always been, right? Sure. And when I've talked to the people at Post, what they say is, well, if we mandate more, you'll expect more reimbursement. And there's truth to that. And I think that's where we have to engage with the legislature to make sure that we're funding Post effectively so that we can fund agencies effectively. Now, I get it. There's scheduling issues and personnel issues, structures, a lot of barriers to this, but I don't think we should allow multiple barriers get in the way of moving through and moving to a much better.
And this is why we're here. This is why we're here, to discuss the plan that ultimately will motivate and inspire Post to make change. But they're not going to make it from their office. We have to make it with data. Data that is so clear and so undeniable that it gets to a point where they don't have a choice but to turn it in from 4 hours every 2 years. The eventual goal is 4 hours a month. An officer gets on the ground, does techniques 4 hours a month. And this is what I wanted to talk about. Now, what's interesting is right now, the officers, agencies that want to offer progressive training, they're having to do it entirely on their own. So anyone who wants to offer weekly jiu-jitsu and like literally bring up to par, these are the most progressive agencies, they're going for it. They're trying to make it happen. Craig's is one example. His state does not mandate weekly or monthly jiu-jitsu at the agency of training of this nature by any means, but the chief said we're going to do it. So there are a good handful of very progressive agencies that are kind of carving the path in terms of what this can look like. And what's interesting is that because there are enough agencies out there that are trying it, some have been successful and some have failed, we've been able to pin down what the biggest challenges are at the agency level for the ongoing weekly implementation of jiu-jitsu based law enforcement training.
Mitch would like to say something.
Go ahead. Mitch can come on in. Yep.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make the point that, the problem I think is even larger than what you're describing, because there's this philosophy of check the box training versus proficiency. So the folks that are making these training standards, they almost want to inoculate themselves against backlash from maybe legal accusations that they're not doing something about it. But the standard that they're not using is proficiency. Are you looking out at the workforce and saying that the folks that are about to go out and do the job have the skills and can perform them under stressful situations? That's the question that should be asked. And that requires extensive proficiency.
Yeah, and great. Thank you, Mitch. And that proving the difference in proficiency between trained and untrained officers requires extensive data. And that's what we have in small little pockets. Like anecdotally, the evidence supporting weekly jiu-jitsu training is very strong, but it's not enough. We need real replicatable data so that someone can look at that and say, okay, this has to be the way forward. And before you know it, from the ground up, we start influencing the power at B. So universal challenges. When we talk about agencies that have tried to institute weekly jiu-jitsu, these are the challenges. And then I want to talk about some solutions. And then I want to talk about how we tackle this on the macro level. Top challenges universally are training injuries. Every chief, when they hear about weekly practice of these grappling skills, control skills, it's going to be training injuries because the workers' comp claims and people are going to train and they're going to spar and they're going to get injured. Understandably, now you've got officer off the streets and yet they're still getting paid. It's an issue for the agency more than ever now. Documentation. When agencies are sending their officers to go learn in the civilian sector, they're learning techniques that are completely, potentially out of policy. So that becomes a concern when it comes to litigation against the agency or against the officer in a use of force. So documentation, there is no clear documentation when we're just doing generic Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Internal challenges for officers, for agencies that are trying to do the training internally amongst and by their own officers. This is when they have maybe they have a purple belt or a brown belt who's an officer and they say, hey, you do the training right here internally. Number one killer of internal programs is the corrosive culture at the agency. If you're in law enforcement, which I'm not, but work very closely with those who are, you guys know that sadly, the culture within law enforcement agencies can be very corrosive, very negative. When we talk about the ways in which officers treat each other, the amount of posturing, the inappropriate language, the inappropriate jokes, sadly, the sexual harassment, all of that is so pervasive at so many agencies that the attempt to have a beautiful training opportunity internally of grappling, jiu-jitsu, and collaboration and problem solving is almost entirely kind of chopped at the knees from the get-go due to the culture at the agency if that's not checked. So sadly, that'll typically kill it before it even starts. Key man dependencies. If you have a stud who's a capable grappler here, he decides to promote or retire or move out, the entire program falls apart. So that's what they've struggled with. And then scalability, creating consistent instructors over time and growing it to feed the whole agency the skills that they need. For external jiu-jitsu, sending someone to a school, the way El Segundo has it with us right now. They send their officers here, they do classes, and we're a great school. Policy is a concern because they're learning techniques here in the civilian sector, but that may be very different from their agency's use of force policy. Sport BJJ limitations. When you're practicing between two people who are grappling for the sake of grappling, it's very different. There's no weapon retention. There's no arrest and control transitions. There's no considerations for these applications and use of force encounters. And then, of course, participation. What we found with El Segundo is very few officers come here on their day off because it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. They don't really want to do that. They're with their families. And then cost, right? The cost is always going to be an issue, especially externally, where you're talking about $150, $200, $300 a month for a tuition. Add that up for all your officers. It becomes cost prohibitive very quickly to send the officer to learn on the external. So what we've created is a program that was entirely based on GST, our program that we've been teaching now for 25 plus years, that is intended to be the weekly jiu-jitsu solution for agencies that want to take that step. Now, the way it works is we already train level 1 and level 2 instructors nationwide by the thousands in our live in-person courses. Once someone has done level 1 and level 2, they qualify to apply for GST hybrid instructor certification. And that's 100% online. 33 videos, lectures explaining administration, teaching methodologies, how to administer the course internally. And this is above and beyond the teaching methodologies and the administration they're taught in the in-person courses, because now we're thinking of it through the lens of teaching weekly jiu-jitsu to their officers. And once they complete that GST hybrid, the agency is then a licensed GST hybrid certified training center that can offer this curriculum on an ongoing basis. And some of the key features that make this the ideal solution, starting at the most important one, is safety. And to this effect, I'll point to the example that we have in Bellevue. It's a 160 officer agency, 100% participation rate. All patrol officers, some detectives as well, right, are participating. 24 classes offered a month by Craig and his colleagues, 1,300 plus training hours thus far, 0 recorded training injuries, and 0 excessive force lawsuits lodged against the agency in the last year based on the training they're receiving. Sir.
Can I ask a question? How did you get 100% participation? I assume you managed it. What other shit? Okay.
So to clarify for those who can't hear, so Craig, what they did is they made it, if they have a 10-hour shift, once a week, not in all of their shifts, but once a week at the beginning of a shift, they'll have the first hour be the class. So we love that. Policy compliant. So GST is California Post certified. Our program is California Post certified at level 1 and level 2. And so the officers that are learning these techniques know that they're learning techniques that are already approved by the state. And this is also, I think we have it here. Yeah. So the map here shows the darker colored shade are all the states where GST is post certified through ADALIST, the International Association. The medium colored, like California, are the ones where they're state certified by the State Licensing Commission. And then a few states, about 5 or 6 states on the right there, that are either they don't have a commission, or if they do, we're pursuing the certifications there as well. So this combined with the fact that all the classes are taught by the agency instructors who are their own staff. So Craig knows his agency's policy. So every single technique of our curriculum is taught through the lens of that agency's policy and can be adapted as such if necessary. Civilian grade instruction. We have 260 plus schools around the world. The number one thing that will make or break an officer's desire to come back to class and participate, besides safety, is the quality of the instruction. So these instructors who become GST hybrid certified, like Craig and his colleagues, are learning how to teach at the same level that we're teaching for in the for-profit sector. Now, why does that matter? Because government grade instruction sucks. The instructor knows the room is captive. The student knows they have to be there. Neither one of them cares that much as a result. There's not a lot of incentive for either party. But we've been teaching civilian instructors now for 15 years. We've been certifying outside schools how to teach jiu-jitsu so safely, so encouragingly, so effectively that people pay money to go to these schools. And it's our belief that if we can teach civilians of all belt ranks, these are not master black belts, blue belts, purple belts, brown belts, all levels of experience, some with as little as 1.5 to 2 years of experience. If we can teach all of these instructors to go out there and teach jiu-jitsu so well that people pay money for it, it's our belief that giving them all the same administration and teaching skills in the government sector, they'll at least be able to give it away for free and people show up enthusiastically. Like, that's the idea. If the world is paying for it, I can teach you how to give it away and people actually say, yes, I'll take that class as part of the perk of being at this agency. Respect culture. This is a big one, you guys. We talked about the culture of concern, the corrosive culture that sadly permeates so many agencies. When we have civilian-owned schools, and we have Gracie University here, we teach a class. Everyone comes in, they're buttoned up, they're on their best behavior. No profanity, no inappropriate joking, no bullying, no sexual harassment for sure, right? No unsafe training. This is very clear to the world. Everyone who's here knows that. Every one of our schools around the world, same culture. And it's the culture you would expect in martial arts: respect, honor, integrity, like what the traditional arts are known for. Sadly, some instructors don't adhere to that, but truthfully, many MMA schools and many BJJ schools, those values are all completely absent, to be clear. Gracie University, 100-year family legacy in jiu-jitsu, it's our core. And we're successful in the civilian sector because we know how to create this culture. So it's our belief that in getting GST hybrid at these agencies and making the training rooms sanctuaries of jiu-jitsu for law enforcement, where they're training on a weekly basis, it's our belief that when we bring in our culture to these agencies, not only will it be a novelty for the agency to say, wow, so we're going to be on our best behavior in here, and we're going to treat each other with respect, and we're going to communicate respectfully because the instructors will demand it of us. It's policy, right? It's on the back of the card. The policy is right here, culture. So every student knows what is expected of them. It's our belief that when officers who are training on a regular basis, weekly, with their colleagues, start to interact with one another in respectful, kind, caring, collaborative ways, that over time, that can become a new norm at the agency, because this culture will be monitored and controlled by Gracie University by way of surveying the instructors and by way of surveying every student in the program nationally. Every single student has a vote. And if a student indicates that the culture is broken there, we will talk to the instructors and we'll take corrective action, which could mean someone is not teaching anymore, right? It could mean a conversation to say, hey, this is what someone said about the class. We've got to button this up, tighten up the reins here to make sure that there's zero tolerance for these behaviors on the mat. And our hope is that over time, that instructor and those students start to carry that out, and the interactions in the hallways are shifted. Instead of this negative cycle that may exist at an agency, it becomes more of a positive cycle of positive training, positive interactions in the hallway, positive interactions in the street. That can be a negative cycle or it can be a positive one. And some people will say, I was talking to Charlie this morning, Henner, some reasons why people will justify that negative culture in an agency is because what? The job is so stressful. The job is so negative. You're interacting with people in their worst days. They're on such negative behavior that when you interact with them, you kind of take that and you're feeling negativity. So you bring it to the agency, and when you interact with your colleagues, you exist in negativity. That's the water you swim in. So it's a negative problem to a negative solution to a negative problem is what we're talking about here. Just exist in that and have the inappropriate behavior within the agency. And our proposal is that maybe we can have a positive solution to a negative problem. Maybe we can shift the culture of the agency, and then that not only affect how they interact in the hallways, but also affect how they interact with the civilians. And interestingly, this is why it's not mandatory, but it's strongly encouraged that these GST hybrid classes take place in jiu-jitsu gis. You go, well, gis, well, they're going to wear this, or they're going to wear some shorts, and they're going to wear a t-shirt, and they're going to be all over each other just in random workout attire. Or you can say, no, we put our uniform on for this. And the same way that your officers will completely change their behavior when they're in their Class A uniforms versus their tactical gear, the same is true when you step on the mat and you, whoop, here we are. And Craig, initially, when we were talked about launching the program, I was like, Craig, I think it's going to be greatest success if we go uniforms there. He's the first pilot location for GST hybrid. I think it should be all uniforms. And he said, Henner, I don't think they're going to want to sponsor the uniforms for the officers, pay for them. I said, bro, I think it could be the make it or break it detail that unites them. And also it's a major sweat barrier and hygiene aspect. Like people who don't know each other with a t-shirt on and sweaty arm and their mouth and legs. And it's pretty awkward to grapple with someone you don't know unless you have these protective layers. So I said, Craig, I think it may be the make it or break it. And then he said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay for the uniforms for all 160 officers. And maybe they'll reimburse me, maybe they won't. So he just did a wholesale purchase, got the gis there for everyone, started going. The program was so successful, they reimbursed, they paid you back, right? They reimbursed them. But the point is, tell me about some of what the students said when they initially, one of the women, I think, communicated to you that was the make it or break it for her. Talk about that.
Yeah, believe it or not, in our work right now, there's still people that exist in law enforcement that are touch averse. And one of them was a coworker of mine.
What'd you call them?
Touch averse.
Touch averse. People still exist in the industry.
She said like, he doesn't even like to do defensive tactics in general because of that. And she's fit. She likes to work out and like put her in close quarters. She goes, no, I'm good. Or she does whatever the minimum is, and that's it. And that's a. There's other coworkers too. Like they come in from their treadmill straight into the training room, like no change or nothing. treadmill, sway, very good, when do close quarter stuff.
Right.
Good combination.
So for her, that was a factor that made the training tolerable. I'll do it.
But she'll tolerate more.
There you go. So there's a hygiene component and a touch averse component, but there's also a culture shift when we say, no, this is what we're doing. This is how we act. And the hope is that that spills out to their everyday interaction.
They said too, like you said about, we're here to train. Like everybody's in their mindset, into uniform. And
when we talk about culture, I thought that was really quite remarkable that, so there's the back of the attendance card. So you can see we talk about culture there and other things, promotions and resources, and also shifting into the right place at the right time. The fact that these classes are offered on a schedule at the agency, at times that make sense for your officers, they're going to show up. If you're offering it off location, off duty, they have to show up on their own time. Maybe they even get paid duty time like they do at El Segundo, but it's still your day off. You got to go to a class. You have to leave your family, leave what you're doing. Right place at the right time makes a huge difference for them. Unparalleled documentation. So this is you can pass that down there. The calendar and the card, just like check that out as we pass it on. It'll be up here as well, but just so you guys get to see it hands-on. So this is the calendar. You can put the schedule in there however you want. It's a cyclic calendar, you guys, of 20 lessons that once you cycle through, you start over and you cycle again. It never ends. And this is the card. Every single student, ladies and gentlemen, every student has an attendance card. All of the techniques are GST hybrid techniques. And every time they do a class, they get a check mark on the card. Look at this. So after 5 or 6 classes, this is what a card might look like. You start getting individual check marks for the classes. And then on the right over there, we have these vertical columns that are the accumulation of the classes. Why is this beneficial? And there's also a roster of everyone who attended, so we know which dates they come, which the classes they've done. So if the agency's ever called into litigation regarding any of the techniques, you can say, oh, this person has done this class 4 times. If this box is checked multiple times, he knows the technique well, he performed it as intended, and it was an unattended injury to the suspect, but he did the technique as he was taught to do, and it's by and large a safe technique as taught to us by Gracie University. All of this can happen if you can say what they learned, when they learned it, how often they've learned it. And now we're moving into scalability and sustainability. No one creates instructors in the civilian sector or in the private sector as well as Gracie University. It's just a fact. So when we talk about scaling this at an agency or sustaining over long periods of time, the ability that we have to create instructors of both GST and then eventually the GST hybrid level for within agency weekly training is unmatched. And this is critical because when you have an administration change, you have a retirement, you have someone transfer out, we want a program that is so strong that it will have staying power regardless of any year-over-year changes in administration. Online video access. Every single officer at the agency gets online video access, desktop, mobile, lesson printouts with the details of every single lesson so they can make progress even when they're not going to the physical classes. They can tune in, see a technique exactly as they learned it in class. They can preview a lesson. Let's say they're coming to a class, but they're nervous. They just log in and watch the same technique. They show up, they're already well-versed in the terminology, the position, the ideas, and then they practice what they just watched. Or if they forget a detail, they can log on later and review it whenever they want. Recruiting benefits. At a time in law enforcement where the desire to be a law enforcement officer is still, right, over the last 3 to 5 years at an all-time low, recruiting has never been so challenging. Agencies that can say, hey, we care about officer safety, we care about civilian safety, and we want to offer training on a weekly basis so that you guys can be safe with your interactions and you can get home safely to your family. You can use this as a recruiting benefit. This is actually a screenshot from Bellevue's recruiting page. And that's actually one of his students. And this is touted as weekly jiu-jitsu. Come on in, you get to have this training, blah, 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 blah. And they click play, you get to watch a video where they show the technique. It's amazing. And they're also listed on our website as a certified jiu-jitsu agency. So any jiu-jitsu, MMA, that whole world who's like, yeah, I want to be a cop. I'm like, yo, that's where you should go. You should go to the agencies that prioritize the training that you already possess extensive training of. That's where you would fit in very nicely and you would get to have that ongoing training as part of your employment. Cost effective. Critical piece. $150 to $300 per officer per month, civilian learning jiu-jitsu. GST hybrid, $20 to $40 per month per officer. And that includes unlimited online access, and that includes everything associated with the program. When we decided to do this in LAPD, you guys, several of CJ's colleagues showed me at LAPD, they have these pins for marksmanship, right? It had the pins for, if you hit the target, we're going to give you a pin. And I thought, wow, that's so interesting. That makes the skill desirable, like a promotion. And I'm like, we ought to do that for jiu-jitsu. So we did 100 classes, bronze pin, 200 classes, silver pin, 300 classes, gold pin. And your card starts looking like this after 6 classes. After 100 classes, the student's card looks like this. They just keep showing up and showing up and showing up, and here we are. And then this happens. He's right there, you guys, Officer Levin, Sergeant Levin. Look at that. So I had the privilege of pinning on his bronze pin. It was the first one to earn one here. These are all his friends and colleagues because they're training here, right? This is what the current relationship with El Segundo. And that was awesome. So they love it. Ways of being recognized. And then Pasco, Ryan, who's on the call right now, Ryan Stevens, who's the corporal there at Pasco, who's going to run. They have a 600 officer agency, their sheriff's office there. And Ryan was like, Henry, if guys are going to do these GST hybrid classes ongoing, can we get like a belt? And I thought, let's do it. And then we created the GST hybrid belt, which you guys see there. So they complete the 100 classes. And if they want to be, because again, this is not everyone will do this, but an officer who completes the program and wants to be verified at this level, because remember, the internal teaching staff can't test them at this level. They would do a video evaluation. They would upload a video evaluation of that officer to gracieuniversity.com, which by the way, we have our website. We do that for civilians all over the world, 400,000 plus online learners in 196 countries. So we're very interactive with our instruction video and our video evaluations. It's a two-way relationship. We extend that to GST hybrid. So an officer who's excelling in the program and says, I want to test in the program, they do a video eval with one of their partners or the instructors. They pass, they earn their GST hybrid belt and their bronze pin potentially once they pass that 100-point mark. And now they're wearing their belt in their classes and the colleagues know it and they recognize it. And there's just this prestige and this respect for the skill and the dedication. And then if I'm the head instructor there, I'm looking at that student and I'm thinking, what? We might put them through the pipeline to become an instructor because they took the time and the energy to test out and demonstrate all of these skills. And they obviously have great pride in it. So this program is happening in Bellevue. It's about to kick off at Pasco in Florida, Pasco Sheriff's Office in Florida. And weekly jiu-jitsu is the way forward. Until every officer in America is getting an hour a week, we're going to continue to see the problems that we see. What people are struggling with is how to administer weekly jiu-jitsu in a way that is safe, sustainable, and cost-effective. That doesn't exist right now with an agency. They don't know what to do. And because we've been part of this industry for 30 years, I see it. Initially, it was, just train the trainers and they do their 4 hours every 2 years. Now, there's a cohort of agencies that are trying to do this, and there's other agencies that haven't, but are like, I don't know how to even start or what to even do. So they're sending them to outside BJJ schools. And in many cases, they're doing that. And because the owner of the school is either, as a felon, is a, drug dealer, which is not uncommon in MMA and jiu-jitsu, it becomes awkward because now you're sending officers to train with someone you don't know and you don't trust, and they're the one responsible for your defensive tactics. So we're literally at the middle, we're at the turning point of law enforcement in America, where these skills need to be offered on a regular basis, but agencies don't know how, the vehicle to deliver it. And that's what we need help with. So the reason why I felt it was important for us to meet is because what I think a logical next step should be, in order to eventually influence the state licensing agencies, kind of almost pressuring them into having to make the obvious and necessary changes for law enforcement in their states, we need to demonstrate efficacy of weekly jiu-jitsu in a consistent and a replicatable way across many, many agencies. And GST hybrid is a way to do that in a way that's both scalable, and the fact that we have a captive audience of over 10,000 GST level 2 certified instructors already that would qualify to say, hey, if they're part of a study and we decide to do this with weekly jiu-jitsu, they would say, hey, we're good, we'll do it, whether it's 12 months, 18 months, whatever we decide the period of time is. And it's my idea, and this is where the researchers certainly have a greater expertise, but you do a controlled, the largest use of force controlled study ever done in America by giving weekly jiu-jitsu to up to 50% of the population in a large number of agencies of varying sizes. And then you split that population, weekly jiu-jitsu, and the control group, no jiu-jitsu. They keep going with their 4 hours every 2 years. And we compare that data after the period of the project. And there's a lot of data points that we can compare, not the least of which we're already kind of disclosed in that anecdotal Marietta case, Marietta, Georgia. But that's where I'd like to open the floor up to some discussion now. Thank you guys for listening. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, starting with our friends at PPIC.
Yeah, sure.
You got on the mask. You should
Yeah, you get to go first. He earned it.
Well, one, thank you for having us and letting me participate in the demonstration. I guess I'd love to hear from the law enforcement in the room that like, especially law enforcement that's been trained in GST, you've had this previous experience of defensive tactics. How did the GST like training change how you approach various interactions in the field? What would you do? What did you notice you were doing before versus after?
Anybody can go.
I'll start. For me, in the sense of teaching, I've been grappling for years, and so it's not a problem for me. But as far as GST and emerging with LAP, as far as instruction, it mirrors that high level format of professionalism, and it does the teaching method of showing, demonstrating, and professional teaching. When we develop our instructors, they literally are just beaming and excited about instructing. It's the other part of it. It's the negative where they're kind of, their hands are kind of tied. But on that level, yeah, it's right up there. So for me, it's a professional. Intrinsically, for me, from the day I started my first use of force, I'll just put this out there. I had a use of force where I took a suspect down and had him completely under control. But I had 3 other guys in my gang unit that didn't have any training. And I spent more time blocking the shots from the officer to the suspect. I took the licks of monkey balls, and that's when I knew we needed something different. So once I got into the archive unit and seeing how it was implemented and how that fingerprint was in there, and now having all of my instructors teaching GST along with me the hour instructions, which the fingerprint was already in there, it's just another level of instruction. And Hannah brought it up about going to other schools. I left the school I was at because I went to GST in 2019, I can't remember what it was, because the environment was different. In fact, I tried to go back into school and ended up doing things to the other students that I never did before from a science level as opposed to going to war and related. It was just different. There was no crazy music, the N-word flying around and right. It was the environment there was just super professional. So you talk about the intrinsic coming out externally. That's where it was for me. For my guys, they're on a whole nother level of instruction. People come through our 80-hour course. They say that's California, that's the place to go, you know, but all because of the environment. And people still want to come to the course. Our course is always full, thanks to that ideology, professionals.
Thanks, CJ. Anybody else want to speak to that, Alex?
I'm the example of law enforcement what not to do. It took me 15 years of law enforcement before I started jiu-jitsu, and the first day I regretted not starting 20 years prior. But one of the big things was as far as what changed out in the field. Now, if I was going to be involved in a use of force situation, instead of relying on a technique that I had learned, you know, for several minutes a year ago or 8 months ago, now it was something like whether they're techniques or principles that I had used the day before or the week before, like multiple times throughout the week. So you brought up stress inoculation, a big thing too, like just being inoculated to that type of stress. Like now when I'm in a use of force situation, you know, I've rolled probably, you know, 16 rounds that prior week with other people. So that's, it's a lot more familiar. It's a lot less stressful. And that's a huge step forward. Just the consistency of the training. Like if we train defensive tactics, as much as we train firearms, we'd be much further ahead. But, you know, if we train firearms as much as we do defensive tactics, I feel much less confident in my firearms.
You used the word principles. What did you mean by that?
So my first use of force after training here is only about 3 months in. So I basically, well, that brings up another point. So basically like 1 stripe white belt, right? 1 stripe means 20 classes. And I'll explain why that's significant to me in a minute. But we got a use of force guy, took a swig of vodka, spit on the ground, you know, said, let's fight. So we take him to the ground. I can't tell you that I did like a specific technique that I learned in class, but once we got him on the ground, I realized, oh, I just need to use my body weight to control him. And then I use that principle of body weight control. And then once I had where his arm was, I realized, oh, he's not going, I had full control of him, he's not going anywhere. So it wasn't exactly a position or technique that we practiced exactly, but the principle of use your body weight, use your hips, control the suspect, and then you realize the threat really isn't existent, really not existent. And the reason I say about the stripe, like 1 stripe on a white belt, that's 20 classes, that's 20 hours. It's not a lot in the span of a jiu-jitsu career. However, when I see a stripe on my belt, I think that's basically 10 years of post-mandated training that's been on for like the last month and a half. So to me, each stripe means 10 years of what post requires.
Wow, powerful. Charlie,
So I'll give a personal story, and then I'll tell you that I've had the same thing reported back to me by students with less experience. But when I became a full-time trainer, I was off the street, so I wasn't using force going to calls all the time. Had an office job. But occasionally, as cops in here can identify, you want to make some extra money, so you go work at police part-time, put the uniform on. So I've had 2 use of force incidents since I started GST in that 16, 17-year period. And they both were like this. I have a fighting subject bigger than me, fighting 100% on the ground. I get to a position of control. Now, here's what's interesting. Once I was in position of control, I intuitively knew I was safe. Then I had the other people we used to call the polyester pile coming at me. And I actually got nervous because like on one of them, a guy took a taser and was pointing at my eye. And he was like, I'm like, calm down. And I started having to de-escalate the other officer. That was a bigger sense of anxiety for me than the suspect. And another one, somebody had spray, OC spray, and it looked like this big, but it was right here. And they were screaming. I'm like, calm down, put it up. I got it. And this guy's struggling a little bit. I got it. And I was nervous about the other officer. Selfishly, I was also nervous about them hurting me, but I was calming them down. But this was not the concern. I've had other people report the same thing where they literally get in there. One guy, Leonard, his famous thing is they had a pile of people on top of somebody, fist, tasers coming out. He basically walks in there and says, hang on, I got it. I got it. Moves people aside, cuffs the person, and then walks off. So that's anecdotally what was happening.
Charles, you talk about culture. In my first use force in '97, that's all right. My guys were upset with me that I didn't allow these punches to come through. And well, you got to get respect.
Street justice. We got to get.
Actually, that happened on one of mine. The one with the things. This person like, why did you do that? He pushed me back there. I'm like, okay, I'm sorry you did, but that's not our job.
There you go. And that's the whole point. This idea of street justice, right? Like you got me, I gotta get you back. That's a very emotional response to a stimulus. And with dynamic de-escalation as the mantra, every technique we teach, it's control. Okay, you got me. Alleviate pressure, communicate commands and benefits, and then either he complies or we cycle back and we increase the level of control gradually as we implement higher levels of control there. So there's no space for street justice. We teach that, we talk about it. They could have punched you 10 minutes ago. Right now, when you control them right now, you don't get them back for that. You simply control and you neutralize until the threat has been neutralized. We don't take it personal. We're doing the job. Yes.
I had a question about how effective all of this is when you're talking about like command and control, and then you basically verbalize to get the compliance on individuals who may not be mentally capable of that. So particularly dealing with both mental health patients and then also individuals who may be under certain substances, which is one of the things that we're finding the harder times to de-escalate in those types of.
Yeah, for those who couldn't hear over there, the question is, how do you de-escalate dynamically with a subject who is either mentally ill or is under the influence? And it certainly makes it harder because when their PFC is impaired, they are suffering an amygdala hijack due to the influence of that, either the mental episode or the drug or alcohol. So you're basically dealing with someone in survival mode. They're in their right self-preservation mode from the get-go. And it is more challenging. And it's almost like the officer has to be more capable physically, technically. Like any one of you could have a mental episode right now. And if me and Hito are the ones arresting you, you're not going to get hurt. You can try to kill us. You're not going to get hurt. We're going to talk to you calmly the entire time. And we are going to place you in cuffs. And you're going to be safe the entire time. But because our skill level is so high, even without any of your participation in your own cuffing procedure, the transition into handcuffing, you are going to get handcuffed and you will get pronated and you will get controlled, but it will be done gently. It'll be done. But again, that's where the strikes matter. That's where the skill matters. And all we want for every officer is to say, no, you could have a mental episode right now and not cooperate at all. And I still will neutralize you first, protect myself at the same time. And then when backup does get here, we'll carefully, essentially use the overload principle, which basically means disproportionate resources to accomplish the goal, right? Which is easier to do when you have multiple officers and we can all do it in tandem.
I had one of the last commendations I wrote when I was reviewing force for my agency was a young officer with a mentally disturbed patient patient, actually on the side of a highway, busy highway. He got what we call side mount positional control, even though the person was incapable of actually processing commands. So he didn't say roll over, nothing like that. He just held it, got on his radio, said, I need more resources. And he just held. And he was calmly, gently talking to this guy. And the guy, you could tell, even though he couldn't process, it was de-escalating a little bit. He went from level 10 to level 7, level 5. More officers came in. Once more officers came in, everybody was calm. It reminded me of a bunch of surgeons and nurses around a table, very calmly coordinating with each other to get a job done instead of a whole bunch of people under a middle hijack. So that person couldn't process it, and he couldn't maybe have the person do something, but he put the fire out, as Senator said. And
That's
slowed it
the
down.
key. It all starts with the control. Perceived and actual. If the actual control is not there or perceived is not there, imagine how on the side of the highway, we've seen the videos, how that goes wrong. The officer loses top position. The suspect is now reaching for their gun in that mentally challenged state, or in their intoxication, reaching for the officer's gun. The officer pulls the gun, uses deadly force, and now we have what could be a regrettable action that could have been avoided if control was prevalent.
And Henry, just to speak to what she brought, which is a good point. In LA, just using LA as an example, there are more and more people demonstrating mental health crisis, fentanyl, narcotic use, and a lot of times law enforcement is contacting people who are dealing with both at the same time. In addition to someone who might have a predatory past or a predatory mindset. So I think with jiu-jitsu competency and that comfort with the discomfort and from training and rolling, you can use time and distance a little bit more, which I think there's a lot of advantage with that. Because if you could use a little bit more time, you can use a little bit more distance. You give yourself the opportunity for that situation, maybe de-escalate. Maybe the suspect agrees to whatever enforcement action occurs. Maybe he or she doesn't, and additional units arrive on scene. I think what happens sometimes is an officer might be worried if he or she rushes me, like, what do I do? Like, what happens? And I think if you kind of have a plan for that, it takes some of the pressure valve off. That what if. So
any other questions? Thank you, Alex. Yeah.
I think she was asking the question based off the joint lock that you saw, right?
Or for all of that, like, so when they release the pressure when you're willing to comply, but if they're not.
If they don't, you just break the arm. That's kind of the question. Like, what if they don't comply? You just break the arm. And the answer is
transition from a joint lock to a positional control. Because someone's having a mental episode, you keep twisting their arm because they can't understand what you're saying.
This is the best
That would be
answer.
unfair to take their arm off.
Yeah.
You jump off to a side control, and you just hold them down, and you allow that time to take pass.
Love that. Yes, sir.
Well, it's a much more boring question. What about interest among law enforcement to participate in the kind of evaluation that you feel is needed? The buy-in from law enforcement, and which also means that you need the right data for it. You know, that has the fidelity that you feel like, yeah, we can trust these data. It also means that you need to create a baseline before the experiment. You're absolutely right about the ideal way to do this, but you also would like to see a baseline before the experiment is actually implemented. So all of those kind of things.
Question, is baseline before instead of a control split control? Or there's a split control count?
It counts. It's just making sure that you don't start off with some differences that you have. If you have a period that you can observe and have a sense of, you know, when you have those measurable outcomes, then that creates, you know, an additional way to ensure that whatever you see in the results isn't driven by, well, maybe it wasn't randomized, for example, right?
Yes, I understand.
Have some of those things that you can establish before that. No, we don't see these differences, and here's the app.
So Charlie, maybe you can speak to the consistency of data within agencies regarding use of force encounters and the tracking of the pre-existing data. I know for sure, and then Charlie can chime in here, regarding your question of their willingness to participate. That is on us. If there's trust with Gracie University and our thousands of agencies that are already teaching this on the 3-4 hour, 2 hours a year basis, that's where you need to rely. If we work together on this, you need to rely on us to say, Henry, can you get me 30, 50, 75 agencies that A, agree that they want to offer the GST hybrid program on a weekly ongoing basis for the duration of the study, and B, and again, I could use some help from, you know, some other people in the room, obviously, and the National Sheriff's Association, for example. But B, once they say, yes, we want to do it, I think that they're absolutely willing to participate and say, hey, you can have the data, you can see the data. So there's a very trusting relationship, and it can be done rather expeditiously because, like I said, the candidates to teach GST hybrid, they're already out there. They just need to say, yes, I will. And then they basically go to this online 33 lesson course and they're effectively certified to offer the program. But regarding existing data, that we would compare the essentially new tested data against, what about that?
Yeah, that brings up a good point, because in addition to a control and experimental group, you can have the before and after. And I think the good news is most agencies now track uses of force. And now there's a little bit of a challenge because everybody defines the levels differently. Like one agency's definition of passive control is different than another agency's, but I think that could be easily overcome by having consistent data points. But you can literally make criteria just to be included in this. The officer has to have been used force X number of times in the last 24 months or something like that, just to make sure you're getting people that, it's worth measuring, because there are officers who go their whole career and never use force. They're assigned to certain units. You can have all sorts of, we could go down the rabbit trail as you're well aware of that. They have to stay in the same unit during the study period. So the data is clean. So yeah, I think there's ways to definitely do that for sure.
Any other questions?
Oh, I just was gonna say that I know this is really being kind of pitched as a de-escalation, to which I think it is, but I think there's also a benefit to also saying that this is part of like the wellness programs that should be done, and that this is kind of benefits to both like officer satisfaction, safety, morale, all of those mental health. And so I think the baseline kind of evaluation of like almost surveying a group before it starts of like, how satisfied are you? What do you think of the culture? How do you feel about, your life? And then kind of taking the test later as well. I think those like that, plus comparing them to the ones who are not participating.
I agree 100%. And as I enthusiastically indicated, the culture shift here, I think, is going to be like the dark horse in this race. There's going to be something here that pops out at the end of all this study where we're going to go, holy cow. Yes, there were fewer uses of force. There were fewer injuries to civilians and officers, all the stuff that's anecdotally kind of revealing itself. But if we can kind of put these data points on the list of like the wish list of things we want to track before and after, 100%, I think we're going to see increase in officer mental health. We're going to see an increase in the culture of satisfaction at the agency as a whole. And I think those are going to be priceless for law enforcement at large to know that that's possible through a seemingly unrelated thing, which is defensive tactics. That is the really exciting thing to track for us, honestly, just as much as the reducing of injuries and reducing of use of force overall.
I have one more question, sorry, for just the officers who's participated, just because I'm very interested in all this. Have you been able to use the techniques on anyone who is armed at all, or are these all unarmed? The places where we see a lot of the use of force is the deadly use of force when someone has an edged weapon and not a firearm, and it seems like everyone won't put hands on anyone. And that leads to the deadly use of force. So how is that trained if someone actually has some type of weapon in their hand?
If someone's armed with a knife, that's a deadly force situation. And I wouldn't recommend that you try to control them or take them down. That's a different thing. But it goes into, and I will tell you that I think one of the systemic problems in law enforcement, we failed law enforcement officers because we have become too reliant on tools as opposed to being able to physically control people in the appropriate circumstances.
Right.
When someone comes with a gun or knife, we have to use tools. But there are a lot of other circumstances where we can gain control and then arrest. And I think this is the answer to that. And I think if you look at some of the recent studies, and I don't want to go through it, there's been some talk about how the use of deadly force, although they garner a lot of attention, oftentimes, the vast majority of times, they're justified. They're justified use of force. Even when we see that with DOJ, as you guys come in and do the investigations, where we're lacking is the ability to control people. And it gets back to what Craig talked about, is there's this adverse reaction to touching people. And we've got to get back to where we can touch people. And I'll end with this. In my 30-year career of law enforcement has been sold on the next best thing. When I started out, it was the PR-24 baton. That was going to solve every single problem. And then it was the pepper spray. That was going to solve every single problem. And now it's easier. It's going to solve every problem. They don't solve problems. And we don't know how to touch people and control them before we can get into a situation with the rest.
So the people have been looking out for the tools, but you are the tool. You are the most powerful, most effective tool, the safest tool, most reliable. And yes, sir.
I just want to say that I think it's what's shocking to the conscience. When you have a suspect that's armed with a deadly weapon, and then police officers have to use the reasonable and necessary force to stop that situation. It's a tragic situation, but I think people understand. But what is shocking to the conscience is when there is a situation where law enforcement is using an inappropriate level of force against a suspect or a person that does not have a weapon. And I think that's where you're coming into the fold with a solution to help law enforcement deal with that situation, to better equip us to handle that. And I think it boils down to a confidence level. When people are confident in their training and their tools, and that they can appropriately handle a situation, I think everyone wins.
Yeah, some others have to do this, but I just want to add in just to very directly answer the question. Once again, the level of force used is a function of the perception of danger. If someone walks in right now with a little box cutter, you would perceive that a certain way as a certain level of danger. And if you had a gun, rightfully so, your gun would be drawn. If someone walked in with a box cutter and me and Hidon were here, we would perceive that at a different level of danger, and we would respond accordingly. The person might end up dying as a result of the use of force. I'm not saying we wouldn't use deadly force. I'm just saying where that same threat falls on the perception is based on our training. And this is the whole point. The same exact subject carrying the same exact potentially deadly weapon is a different level of threat to a differently trained officer. That's all we can say about this. And if you're training once every year for 4 hours versus once a week for an hour, that same person, and so we're kind of articulating a very black and white situation of, someone has a knife and the sheriff explained it perfectly. That's deadly force. It's very blanket. It's very black and white. But there are also situations where you're on the ground grappling someone. They reach for their pocket. Their hand is in their pocket. They're pulling something out. Someone who's well trained puts a hand on that wrist, locks it down, tie it up in a little arm lock, squeeze it, drop the weapon, sir. All right, get up, slowly, stay away from the weapon. We can de-escalate that if we were at close range and we had to do that. Whereas an untrained officer, he reaches for the pocket, he might say, I don't have the skills to deal with that, so I have to jump up and pull out my gun. And when they stand up with that knife, I have to shoot them. This is where the nuances of this discussion would be explored. And all we can say is, if it's true that level of force is a function of danger perception, guess what? Lower the perceived danger by increasing training, and we lower the necessary force in that encounter every time.
And sometimes also because, the knife situations are relatively rare. They're not an everyday occurrence, but they do happen. And when they happen, they're bad. And when they're not handled right, they're bad. And one phenomena I have seen over the years, not like personally experienced it, but I've seen in the law enforcement community is somebody may have a knife, but they're over there. They're 50 yards away. The officer, because they don't train very much, they just know this 21-foot rule, which is a totally different subject. And they rush into 10 feet and they shoot them. It sounds crazy, but it's happened. There's been court cases and stuff like that where they'll get too close and then they say, well, I was too close. Therefore, one thing in the program that we talk about is distance management. That is managing the distance and understanding the threat. So if you're in PFC control, you can properly evaluate the threat and make the right countermeasures. If you're in the middle of hijack, I've seen officers do crazy things on felony traffic stops, just sprint up there and try to go into the car, all sorts of silly things because they were in the middle of a hijack. So I think that's kind of the key. If we can stay in PFC control, we can mitigate a lot of those situations.
And that 21-foot rule is for a suspect running at it. So
yeah, because they don't know. To your point, because they're not trained.
To your point, yeah, an officer gets excited and in their mind they're running towards it. Oh, they're hijacked.
So they create the situation and then they use deadly force to solve the situation. They kind of sort of created.
There was any other hands on that? Yes, sir.
Just kind of piggyback on what Charlie was saying. An officer can't de-escalate a situation unless they themselves are de-escalated. There are a million times in my career, I'm like, man, I was under a lot of stress, right? But stress inoculation of jiu-jitsu doesn't stop in just non-lethal force situations, but extends to lethal force situations. Like last week, I came across a guy who reported he pointed a gun at someone. He was uncooperative. I get out. Like, that's not a jiu-jitsu situation. It's like a beanbag 40 millimeter, less lethal or lethal that presents itself. And the same reaction in the brain, that stress, It's the same response, whether it's a lethal force or non-lethal force situation. So if you're inoculated to that type of stress, I think I was more calm in that situation because I've been inoculated to this kind of stress here. So it was still helpful to be able to use time, distance, de-escalation tools, all that kind of stuff. Long story short, he was taken into custody after pursuing a small takedown, but that I think that it will help the potential for the success of the de-escalation in a lethal force situation, although sometimes that's not avoidable.
PFC, you guys, Dr. Arnston, all we want is every officer to make rational, carefully thought out decisions. Effective decision making is the goal. Voluntary compliance is the goal. Dynamic de-escalation. I think we can wrap it up. You guys, I'm very grateful that everyone took the time, and I'm committed. And like you said, we have no fear and have no question about our ability with our relationships in law enforcement to get agencies very eager, especially considering the fact that this is a study and a research project aimed at revealing the truth about more frequent training and the impact that has on officer and civilian safety. So we can recruit that. We just need to know that we're going to have a credible research agency that's going to partner with us to analyze the data so that what comes out on the other end of that is credible, clear, and undeniable, whether it be for a police chief who's looking to make a decision for their agency or whether it be for policymakers who are, shaping the future of the state and the country. So congratulations, you guys, and thank you. I'll be hanging around here on the mat in case anybody wants to get down or ask any questions. Technical, come on, Deepak, come on, bro. Class number 2. But we'll be around for a few minutes, you guys. I really appreciate the time. Charlie, Youngin, the whole crew internally for pulling this one together. Jeff, thank you. Thank you, guys. Appreciate everyone. Yeah.